So we're really excited tonight to have 4 readers all launching books this within the next, like today or the next few days or yesterday, which is, just a really nice chance to gather a lot of poets. So we'll have Sham-e-Ali Nayeem, Hai Dang-Phan, Jenifer Sang Eun Park, and Lawrence Lacambra Ypil. So I'll start with just introducing Shami. Yeah. Okay. Sham-e-Ali Nayeem was born in Hyderabad, India, and lived there, the UK, and the US, all before the age of 5. Shami is part of the special family of poets who come from being lawyers, a former public insurance lawyer supporting economic justice for survivors of family violence. Shami's poetry embodies a kind of weaving practice where what she calls the soul strands inextricably link birth and death and are not just an abstract longing, wishing, caring, but rather in the bone, blood, breath of body and earth. Split in two but not breaking, her words, the linking soul strands in Shami's poetry resist the division of borders and displacement while addressing the violence and pain of both. Please welcome Sham-e Nayeem and her debut collection with Upset Press, City of Pearls.
Good evening, everyone. It's beautiful to see this full room. Thank you so much. When I heard that the theme this evening, is the sound okay? Okay. When I heard that the theme this evening was memory vessels, it really resonated with me on so many levels. I'm going to start with a quote from one of my favorite poets, Agha Shahid Ali. If home is found on both sides of the globe, home is of course here and always a mist land. So I'm going to introduce each poem with a connection to a memory vessel. This is the prayer memory vessel. Invocation. My dad walks with me in the mornings. The sun is new. Even in the cold, I can feel him in unknown spaces and collapse. If I were sad, he'd bring me fruit and water. If I were scared, he'd listen and offer counsel. He would give me a poem. He would tell me a joke. And I would know that he was there. I've never seen my dad cry, but I have seen him leave this world. I felt him as a machine sang a flat note parallel to a digital line on a screen. I reached for his hand. My dad walks with me in the mornings. He taught me how to plant things. He showed me how to herd sheep, to pay attention to life force, listen to the earth. He would tell me, this is but a moment. He would tell me, you're a good mom. He would show me maps in the sky and how evergreens never lose their emerald. He would read Ayatul Kursi. It would smell of safety and rosewater. He would say, Alif, Lam, Mim. And I would know that he was there. He would say, this world is full of secrets. He would say, listen. So when I was meditating on the concept of a memory vessel, I was thinking in my mind, what is the being that holds the oldest memories of the earth? And that would, to me, would be water, the oceans, rivers. Water is the memory keeper of our planet. So this is memory vessel as water, the river Musi. And the river Musi is a river that runs through the city of Hyderabad, India. My beginning lies by the river Musi, bisecting my birthplace between old and new city, tributary and life source to a city of pearls. Musi flows like a thin fissure in a heart now split in two. Polluted river swells and recedes, streaking oily rainbow ripples over glossy water. South of the river, old city, with my father's home and its Shia shrines. Heart and eyes, memory of floods and earth that cradles rebellious bones. North of the river, Malapali, with my mother's home and its winding streets, the lungs and gut and breath that does not remember when the sky dips low to kiss you. On some other earth, under a different sky, I dream you. Do you remember me? Your daughter, born at sunset, a beginning of evening. No matter how far, whatever bridge I cross, I kneel by your banks, tenderly cup you in my hands. I love you. At the river Musi, my city becomes whole. Memory vessel in the aerogram, continent to continent. So the story of this is when, my dad had to immigrate here to the US before my mother and my sister were able to join him. So we were in England for 1 year and he was here, and they would, there was no internet and the phone calls were quite expensive, so they would write these beautiful letters to each other. And I found them later after he had passed away in a drawer together, her responses and his together. Aerograms, the color of sky, sent from one apartment to a rented room in another continent, unite years later in a drawer with the fragrance of sandalwood and ink. Cornflower tissue thin rivers contain daffodils and white pines that touch clouds. A net carefully woven for years is cast across the sky, a dew-covered web glistening. Everything weaves back to homes made any place on this earth, across the hemisphere, across salt and blue, clay and dust. I dreamt it real. Memory vessel as the unfinished memory before bombing. It's about to happen. Cure to disease extinguished. Answers to questions left hanging. The unfinished tea is still warm on the table. Faint print of lips dry on the edge of glass. Echinacea and salvias miss the ones that watered them. Bouquets of sharp trajectories push into hands that never wish to hold them. The walls are whispering. So this next piece is memory vessel as migration memory. It's called Impossible, and it's in response to the Muslim ban. How do you ban soul, spring, stars, a butterfly's path, dense ocean basin currents, the guiding songs of whales? How do you ban the orbit of moon? So I'm going to go back to another water poem because I just feel it's so powerful as it relates to memory. This is called The Beginning of Something. If you swim across the Atlantic Ocean, then you know about this. You know the texture of the sand, harsh and rough, the waves, unassuming, sometimes treacherous. If you get knocked off your feet, the ocean here will swallow you. The shells are sharp and scrape off skin as you are taken underwater, submerged in a salty vortex, your lungs a clenched fist. The muffled silence of this other world. Eventually, you are spit to shore. Find yourself in the glaring light, surrounded by a beach of people unconcerned. There's only a little bleeding under the skin torn. It wasn't a big deal. A wave. It took you, only for a second, to that other place. Memory vessel as mirror. Seeing ourselves. No matter that I was told to devalue her, resilient with kaleidoscopic beauty, flourishing even without nourishment. Told to embrace apologies for oppression or pull the frayed edges of fabric we have woven, holding our tale in our words. How do I see you through the tangled caricature? Us, sharing story over dinner as we carefully weave soul strands together, or the serenity of your smile as you greet me with peace on the subway platform. Memory vessel as the unsaid. Is everyone doing okay? Okay. All the things we never say are teetering at the edge, frozen by the heart's cliff, a valley of unsent letters and deleted text messages. They dwell in a parallel dimension, become alternative realities, an easy road veering towards the direction that was right, a compass in a sea of synchronicity, a sky full of clear constellations, the place where it all worked out. Memory vessel, what's the word? Simultaneous histories. This one's called Masoor Dal. And Masoor Dal, before it's cooked, is sort of like a bright orange color. Are people familiar with it? Yeah? A bag of lentils burst, Masoor Dal scattering across the moving van floor. At the time, she imagined it a blessing, a bright orange path of confetti welcoming her and her husband to the new place. In retrospect, the bag tore, spilling a haphazard trail of wasted food, leading to an apartment door, all swept up later alone, before she returned an empty U-Haul back to the garage. Memory vessel as soul. Moth. It isn't in the wings or the flying where freedom takes place. It is in the quiet cosmos of your unbecoming. In a case of silk, your essence is protected, while imaginal discs shift, molt into mystery, cave in. May a song be an anchor while your body falls into itself. May you find beauty in the reconstruction. Do you remember your simultaneous origin and conclusion? Do you remember how once, in a cocoon, you met yourself? So my final poem of the night is called Between You and You. And this, again, is another memory vessel of body memory. Somewhere on a cliff in the Himalayas, you smelled the fragrance of your own mortality, found your reflection in the mud. You honored the way you loved, the way your heart broke, how life became living, became generative, regenerative, magic, mimicked nature, experienced itself. When the boulders lodged in your spine finally turned to dust, when you learned how to stand straight, when you laid flowers at the entrance to your womb, when a thread of light lit a river through you, conduit between the earth's core and infinity, here you kissed the middle of your own palm, above the lifeline, below the heart line. You experienced how spirit rests in the colors at the edge of breath, meridians, small portals to no space or time. You stopped longing, wishing, caring, became bone, blood, breath. A heart of 4 chambers in release. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sham-e. I feel it's like a very still, quiet space because of you now. Thank you. Our second reader is Hai Dang-Phan. Hai Dang-Phan was born in Vietnam and grew up in Wisconsin. He is currently teaching at Grinnell College in Iowa City, and Reenactments is his first book of poetry. The first words of this first book: "It was my turn to play dead," point to the book's intention, or perhaps the book's willful submission to choiceless need, to retrace the paths of the poet's family's forced migration from Vietnam in 1981 to the Midwest of the United States, or the Midwest of everywhere, as he says. In a combination of family interview, translation, revisited marginalia, archived letters, interrogations of film and photography, and a tilting at the wooden mills, Hai Dang is a gentle gardener of the past, which he calls hardy, adaptable, and effusive, which blooms perennially in the most neglected of plots. So please welcome Hai Dang-Phan and his reenactments.
Thank you, Kaitlin, so much. It's so cool to be here. It's true, I was born in Vietnam, and I left when I was about 2, grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, because my family was sponsored by a Lutheran church, or as I like to say, abducted by Lutherans. So imagine a small Main Street town, the only Vietnamese family in that town. In high school, I had a friend, we worked on the same literary magazine. She went to this great city called San Francisco, brought back the Watermark anthology, which was one of the early anthologies put out by the Asian American Writers Festival, and that was really life-changing for me, refugee kid in Wisconsin, and seeing all these other voices, and in particular, one voice in particular, Lyndon, whose work I admire, and whose The first poem is For and After Him, and this is based on a project, a project we did when I was in grad school, an internet encyclopedia of ill-fated, untranslated, and mostly forgotten poets from Vietnam. It's called Lives of the Vietnamese Poets, For and After Linh Dinh. Early on in his career, this poet wrote patriotic poems inspiring youth to premature but glorious deaths. This poet was one of the first of his countrymen to cut his hair short and adopt barbarian clothing and habits of speech. This poet spent 3 months in jail, where he failed to commit suicide. A reluctant survivor, he committed his poems to memory. By his own admission, this poet became brilliantly mad. He was, by all accounts, the closest to a beatnik our country has ever produced. To this poet, a finished poem is a corpse, a published poem, a mummy. Favorite themes, romantic love, alcohol, and opium. This poet was also a collector of jokes, many of them bawdy. As critics have observed, this poet's poems, profane, obscene, and silly, appear to be written by a 5-year-old or a literate drunk. This poet went from a somebody to a nobody, and then back to a somebody nobody read. This poet died in a neighboring country of malaria while on a gold-digging expedition to escape from debts. This poet introduced a cleaner, starker music into verse and was the first to write about jazz. Forgotten by all but a few, he escaped overseas. This poet became obsessed with phantoms, penning classics such as Phantom Spring, Adventures of Phantom, Village of Phantoms, and My Life as a Phantom. This poet is the author of one unfinished historical novel and over 100 unwritten poems. So this poet published his first book in February, and it's called, thank you, it's called Reenactments, and I sort of became fascinated or interested with this idea of reenactments, partly through this photographer named An Mi-le, who I actually saw here speak, but whose photography you should check out. But it helped me conceptualize poems as these little reenactment machines that help us sort of relive memories, experiences that are ours and not always ours, to get them right, to see them clear. A brief history of reenactment. On day one, the photographer walks into camp and immediately starts shooting. She shoots us at breakfast, eating our sea rations, in our hammocks, reading Stars and Stripes. She shoots us in her sleep. When we first cross paths at the creek, she says, "Hello, tiger. Nice combat boots. Is that thing real?" Pointing to my Special Forces jungle shirt. "I'm afraid so," I say nonchalantly, trying to mask my satisfaction. Day 2, no more messing around. The photographer has agreed to join the action. So what's the scenario? A lone guerrilla left over in a booby-trapped village jumps out of a hidey hole and ambushes the platoon on a search and destroy. Good thing I brought my black pajamas and sandals. What a trooper. She also plays the captured prisoner, the native informant, and the beautiful turncoat. The sniper girl is her favorite role because it's like taking pictures. The beauty, her voice volleys spookily from behind some rocks as she picks off one of my men after another. Sometimes the photographer shoots herself. I know she has her own personal baggage. Later, I find her sobbing in the bamboo grove. I tell her, it's okay, these wars only last 3 days. What will you do when it's all over? She asks. I don't know, I say. Plan the next one. On day 3, after another routine patrol, we sit together on my favorite log in the shade of oaks and devise more scenarios. The topo map unfolds across our laps like a magic carpet. She's got killer bangs above camera eyes. I mark all the dangers and landing zones. She speaks of controlled light and the hole that opens up when you press the shutter button. At 2400, our hands nearly touch. There was a meteor shower. I call in mortar fire. So the collection also, my own poems and translations, and also I sort of get confused after a while because a lot of the poems adapt language, use found material. But translation is sort of a way in which I am able to zip into someone else's life and memories. And the book contains a lot of translations by this poet named Fan Yin Hao, and I also was introduced to his work by Lyndon. And I'm going to do something I thought I'd never do, which is read off of my phone. Because this is called Meeting a Cab Driver in New York by Fan Yin Hao. The yellow cab runs on roads ripped open by earthquakes and never sealed. Skyscrapers veer overhead. Nguyen Van B has lived in New York for 28 years. He's still not fluent in English. His French is better. Robbed 3 times at gunpoint, B says, anything worth losing I've already lost. Country, youth, dreams. Back in Saigon, my family had 2 servants and a chauffeur. Now, I am the chauffeur of millions of people. In this city, you catch a cab by whistling. Just wave your hand and I'll run right up to you like a yellow dog called taxi. Don't worry, no need to tip me. After all, we're both Vietnamese. So these poems, I guess, are also all memory vessels and contain memory vessels. And this next, the memory vessel in this next poem is a movie starring Brad Pitt called World War Z, which I watched on a Thanksgiving in Madison with my family. And I told them about this reading, and so they might the live stream. So my nieces and nephews, my mom and dad, and my sister connect. So if you're out there, hi guys. Watching World War Z. Remember when Dad said he killed zombies for a living? Thanksgiving, we were all downstairs watching World War Z. Brad Pitt stabbing every undead soul with the kitchen knife he had duct taped to the end of a shotgun, as he led his family to the tenement rooftop in Newark where, of course, a helicopter awaited. Outside, trees stood sentry and winter threatened to launch its first assault on our nights and days, while another city succumbed on the plasma screen and death was figured as an unwanted rebirth. Which is when Dad deadpanned the thing about killing zombies at work, and we laughed in the dark, not knowing what a botnet was. Shortly after, you were the first to go, though you lasted longer than anyone expected, lumbering back upstairs to sleep just before a tidal wave amazed the walls of Jerusalem, aided by computer-generated imagery of the different shapes a crowd can take. Pyramid, tentacle, wave. The world, for the most part, resembled ours. After all, ours is an age of extremity, zombie sci-fi reflecting and allaying our worldwide anxiety. or so Susan Sontag would say, whom I refrained from quoting because I anticipated your eyes rolling. There he goes again. You also missed Mom's live commentary on the chaotic scene at the besieged airport. She said it was just like Saigon, April 1975, the runway swarming with desperate bodies, the improbable escape on the last flight out. It must have happened in ultra-high definition, those final days before they were Mom and Dad. The movie family was reunited in Nova Scotia, svelte in parkas and ready to face the sequel. That was November 2013. We were at your house in Madison celebrating Thanksgiving early. Another war was on. You were about to be a mother and slept for a generation. That was a fun time. This next one, I guess what you need to know is that I'm a professor of English, and my first break back, I drove back home, and my mom sort of asked me to like go through the basement to get rid of some books. And one of the books I found was an old Norton anthology, which maybe many of us know of. That was my dad's, and it had a bunch of marginalia scribbled in it, both in Vietnamese and English. And so I was like, cool. And so this poem it quotes from that book and also some of the things he writes. I'm not going to signal those, but just know that that's the case. My Father's Norton Introduction to Literature, 3rd edition, 1981. Certain words give him trouble, like cannibals, puzzles, sob, bosom, martyr, deteriorate, shake, astonishes, vexed, ode. These he looks up and studiously annotates in Vietnamese. Ravish means gup doc. Shits is like when we have to đi. Mourners are those whom we say are full of buông rau. For even the like precurse of feared events, think about Juk. Its thin, translucent pages are webbed with his marginalia, graphite ghosts of a living hand, and the notes often sound just like him. All depend on how look at thing, he pencils after I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. His slanted handwriting is generally small but firm and clear. His pencil is a number 2, his preferred highlighter, Arctic blue. I can see my father trying out the tools of literary analysis. He identifies the turning point of the short and happy life of Francis Macomber, underlines the simile in both the old man and the child stared ahead as if they were awaiting an apparition. My father, as he reads, continues to notice relevant passages and to register significant reactions, but increasingly sorts out his ideas in English, shaking off those Vietnamese glosses. 1981 was the same year we vượt biển and came to America, where my father took intro lit for fun, comp sci for job. Stopping by Woods on a snowy evening, he murmurs something about the dark side of life, how awful it can be, as I begin to track silence and signal to a cold source. Reading Ransom's Bells for John Whiteside's Daughter, a poem about a young girl's death, as my father notes, how could he not have been vexed at her brown study lying so primly propped, since he never properly observed, I realize this just now, his own daughter's wake. Laylam Nyak Nying Ve is what it means to be astonished. Her name was Dom Sua, ancient winter, but at home she's Bebe. There was such speed in her little body and such lightness in her footfall, it is no wonder her brown study astonishes us all. In the photo of her that hangs in my parents' house, She is always 14 months old and staring into the future. In re-education camp, he had to believe she was alive because my mother on visits took arms against her shadow. Did the memory of those days sweep over him like a leaf storm from the pages of a forgotten autumn? Lost in the margins, I'm reading the way I discourage my students from reading. But this is how we deal with death, his black pen replies. Assume there is a reason for everything, instructs a green asterisk. Then, between pages 896 and 897, opened to Stevens's Sunday Morning, I pick out a newspaper clipping, small as a stamp, an old listing from the 404 Employment Op State of Minnesota, and read, "For current job opportunities, dial 612-297-3180. Answered 24 hours. When I dial, the automated female voice on the other end informs me I've reached a non-working number. I'll read one last poem. It's called Osprey. What you need to know is Osprey is a Seahawk and also the name of a military aircraft. Osprey. Swelling out of the ocean like a bad feeling. Heard before seen, slouching towards Miramar over Venice Beach. It's the Bell Boeing V-22. Not sleek, but versatile. Able to launch from Al-Assad, fly to Mutilation, then return, all within the golden hour. Fast enough to outrun a difficult past, the budgetary hurdles and crashes in R&D, the $72 million price tag fly away, its many modes, and we think moods. You remember its namesake in another state, fled from some outer dark, gliding above the diamond, from left field to center, where it made its home up in the stadium lights, a crown of wooden swords for its nest, hovering in the swampy air like forethought, as the crack of a bat sent a tiny moon into orbit, a wave rippling through the crowd, the lights on their tall stems powered on, day powered down, and you had no team. You did not know whom to root for, home or away. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out, and thank you, Asian American Writers Workshop, for organizing and hosting this event. My name is G. I'm the publisher of Gaudy Boy, and we're very, very pleased to publish the next two poets that you will be hearing. They are the co-winners of the first Gaudy Boy Poetry Book Award, Book Prize. And we are a New York-based literary press, and we publish not only poetry, but also fiction and literary nonfiction. The second Gaudy Boy Poetry Book Prize is now open for submissions, so please come to speak to us about the press or about the book prize. I'm going to now ask the Gaudy Boy team to just raise your hands, and you can look around and see who they are. All right, we would love to talk to you. So thank you very much for being here.
Okay, so I'll introduce the two final readers of the Gaudy Boy Book Prize. Jenifer Sang Eun Park was born in Denver, Colorado, and currently lives and teaches in Tuscaloosa. Autobiography of Horse is her first book, which follows her chapbook, When the Horse Lights the Night. As a co-winner of the first Gaudy Boy Poetry Book Prize by Singapore Unbound, the book-length poem Autobiography of Horse is described as a feverish book that documents one's obsessive and parasitic relationship with the horse. And it's easy to feel the fever that pulses through the hybrid materials of this book. But within its fever, the poem also maintains its own kind of lucid control, which, as the poet writes in the opening pages, lies in the absence of resistance. In this carefully charted cartography of an obsessive mind, one that's sick with comprehension, a horse is many, many things. But as this poet self-presents on her website, Jenifer is not a horse. Please welcome Jenifer Sang Eun Park and Autobiography of Horse.
Hi, thank you for being here and for letting me be a part of tonight. I'm just going to read some snippets from the beginning, which I'll just call nays, and hopefully you'll enjoy this little stampede. In 12th century Cynil Sunil, the most remote part of Ulster, Ireland, a king is inaugurated through the slaughter and ceremonial consumption of a mare. The appointed mare must be as white as a bleached skull. Once the mare is identified, she's led to the center of the crowd and waits for the new king to confess humility by crawling to her on all fours. By rephrasing his body, the king submits himself as a beast to another beast. After the initial transaction is complete, the white mare is cut into pieces and boiled in a large cauldron. From the stewing broth, a bath is prepared for the king. The king sits in the cauldron and is served chunks of the mare's flesh. Members of the community stand around the cauldron to share the flesh with the king. Later, the king is required to drink the broth by lapping it up with his mouth. At this moment, the transfer is complete. Two white mares in a field, equally formidable and equally beautiful. Each contemplates, which of us will be taken for our blood and meat? Which will be good enough for the next king? I ate the horse years ago, and it still hasn't left my body. A serving of horse is 28 grams of protein, 6 grams of fat, 5 milligrams of iron, 55 milligrams of sodium, 65 milligrams of cholesterol, and a total of 175 calories. A serving of horse has 25% less fat, 27% less sodium, and 30% less cholesterol than ground beef. Horse meat is low in saturated fats, rich in polyunsaturated fats, and proven to lower cholesterol. I watched the next horse butcher itself, and the next. The horse lives as a forever cadaver. Though previously endangered, the horse of Jeju-do, an island located in the Korea Strait, is still considered a delicacy. Due to its lean profile, the Jeju horse is more tender and flavorful when eaten raw. Once the meat is pulled from the stocky rectangular frame, it's tossed in sesame oil for a light tartare, placed on a nub of rice, or positioned in a ring of thick slices on a decorated plate. Horse meat, however, isn't the only use of the Jeju horse. Its soul is extracted and manufactured into creams and oils for beauty products, and its bones are ground up and sold as pills for the treatment of arthritis and other bone diseases. Ancient Patagonian Indians extract the stomach of a mare to hold a baby. Once the soft packet of human flesh enters a sinewy stomach, a spiritual osmosis occurs. Encased in the wet and still warm envelope of her stomach, the child is imbued with the qualities of the horse. Under a more vigorous procedure, the neck, body, and legs of the horse are lassoed. Members of the tribe distribute themselves across each end of the lasso to upturn and steady the horse. As soon as the horse slows her breathing, the father of the child slits the mare from the neck down. After the heart and innards are removed, the baby is placed in the cavity. The goal is to keep the animal stuttering until the child is placed inside his secondary womb. If achieved, the Patagonian Indians believe they ensure the child's destiny as a superior horseman. The remainder of the mare is prepared for a feast, and the community joins to savor the sum. A 150-gram bottle of Jeju horse bone pills sells for $48.32. A 50 milliliter container of Jeju horse oil cream sells for $47.90. The horse oil soothing gel cream is $12.84. And the luxurious Jeju horse placenta and oil natural facial cream is an even $124. Some of us are ingenious cannibals. The night before my inauguration as King of Kunil, I'll paint every white mare black. See, I'll say when they look for the white mare. She's gone, and there are none. On inauguration day, I'll walk to the center and ask to be cut and boiled into a broth. Cook me, I'll say. Then gather the black mares and bathe them in my soup. Feed them my flesh. I learned long ago how futile it is to resist what we feel. Hence, control lies in the absence of resistance. Impatient, I waited. Silent, I spoke. Mutable, I studied. In the wait, the horse shed 2 legs and slipped through a seam in the mirror. The horse became that crucial bite, the beginning of a story gone awry. A few years ago, I developed the habit of grinding my teeth. A committee would call it bruxism. My mom noticed this when we shared a hotel room in Lecomba. You grind your teeth, she said as we ate breakfast. Very mom, very trademark mom. I stopped eating and looked at her. I didn't know what it sounded like, so I looked it up. A woman recorded her husband grinding his teeth in his sleep. It is the worst sound a human can make. I sit in front of a building and watch who opens the door for strangers. She is nice, I say when she extends her arm to keep the door pried open. She is not a horse. He is nice, I say when he opens the door for others before he walks in. He is not a horse. I can't stop. Lecomba, a short BART ride from San Francisco, is popularly known as the City of Souls. With most of its land dedicated to cemeteries, the population of the dead exceeds the town's living population. I know exactly what it feels like to live among the dead. My job is to talk to the dead. My job is to undo the living. In my teeth is a city of souls, scratching to escape and neigh. There are no known causes for bruxism, but many cite stress as a factor. Did I grind my teeth last night? Asked my partner. Was it bad? I try to do it when I'm awake and I fail. The pressure required to mill molars against each other for even the slightest audibility is too difficult to reenact. I floss out bones and watch histories trample out. I ate too many horses on my way here. And finally, some explanations on why I write about the horse. 1. I just think horses are cool. 2, I was tired of seeing the sky in your eyes. 3, at the end, there was a question mark. 4, I got lost on my way home. 5, the mirror needed fixing. 6, because the past is more uncertain than the future. 7, my body is too small for my body. 8, no other mask seemed to fit. 9, I was jealous. 10, I shit my heart out and needed a replacement. 11, I was playing the longest game of hide and seek. 12, I came upon a fortress and the door was locked. 13, I was experimenting with renewable energy sources. 14, my grandma is a horse. 15, my horse is not my grandma. 16, I am the Judas horse. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenifer. I love the line, "My body is too small for my body." I like keep having it play in my head now. So our final reader for tonight, Lawrence Lacambra Ypil, is from Cebu, Philippines, and is currently teaching writing at Yale NUS College in Singapore. His first book of poems, The Highest Hiding Place, and releasing tonight is his second collection, Experiment of the Tropics, also selected as the co-winner of the Singapore Unbound Gaudy Poetry Book Prize, which is now open for submissions. So embedded with early 20th century photographs, Experiment of the Tropics is a book taking up the possibilities and failures of still images to produce a greater understanding of their captured time-space. Specifically here, the Philippines, during American occupation and colonization. Across Lawrence's ekphrastic/documentary poetry, objects are presented, but also are shrouded in the emptiness of their presence. Fresh as the underbelly of not saying. If, as he writes, a parade is a way of finding something without looking, perhaps Lawrence's poetry is a way of looking at the colonized Philippines without finding, or rather, with finding the nothing within that something. Please welcome Lawrence Lacambra Ypil and the Experiment of the Tropics.
Thank you so much. I feel I have so many people to thank. Gaudy by Press for publishing the work of Jenifer. I love your poetry, Jenifer. I am so happy to have the book out with yours. I feel like one of my dreams has come true today. We live in a world where we only get to talk to each other on Facebook. And in this room are people who are dear to me, family, friends, who are physically here in one room. And it's almost like impossible for that to happen, but tonight it's here. So I really want to thank everyone, family and friends who came out tonight. Thank you for being here. Third thing to thank before I go intense into the poetry. Thank you for this space. It's my first time here, and when I was sitting there, I was surrounded by all these books that I grew up reading. And this is a journal, a lit review from decades ago, where my first poem that was published in the US came out. And it's humbling to know that there is a space here in New York that houses the poems that I love. And I read growing up in the Philippines. What a weird world to know that this exists. I'm very happy to be reading these poems in this space. Thank you for making this space. How does this? Okay, I'm just gonna. This book is a book of poems on photographs, and They're photographs from the early 20th century. The US occupied the Philippines from 1900 to 1945. And I got obsessed with these photographs and I wrote poems about them. I thought I'd share some of these photographs, so I hope this works. I printed these photographs, old school style, and I carried them around for like 5 years. Literally hand carried in too many plane rides. The American period in the Philippines is usually called peacetime. Obviously, that was not exactly accurate. Things were more complicated than that. The photographs, though, are quite beautiful, even if they are evidence of a very difficult time. Maybe let's stay here. This is one of my favorite. The history of towns is always the history of looking back. Where is the bell tower? There is a tree and it still stands. A family is only as good as the father who is gone. A brother with a son. A daughter who is only as good as a vase of roses, which meant very good. I never lived to see, which did not mean that I had died before the city had a train that would have allowed me to cross the length of an island and stare at the sea. But there I stood. In the time it takes for the shadow of the world to reach the shadow of the knee of the woman sitting in the park under a tree, a photograph is developed. Drip, drip, splash, then all right, then a dry mount against the wet, wet grass. When the city's architects asked what could be done with the past, they didn't anticipate glass. They believed the ocean, with its endless shimmer of always, would make the dame denizens of the city sick from squinting at the sea. What reprieve the streets could be, what rain falling endlessly from the eaves of shop houses as a line of trees becomes the token gesture nature makes to signify an elsewhere here, where a woman slowly rises to become the shadow of a shadow of me. There is a river and then there is a man. There is a skirt and then there is a woman, 3 women, their feet dipped in the water. A dam is built in Bolok Bolok and it is called progress. A dam is built in Bolok Bolok and families on weekends congregate in circles to watch the show of water spilling from the mouth of a river to the mouth of a wall. It is magic, says the girl, standing at the edge of the pool, tilting her head to the right. It is magic, says the man, holding his arms above the water, waving his arms above a stream that has been conjured first out of a bush, then out of a cliff, then out of a pipe that runs through miles across a city, miles across through towns where the corn is planted and the harvest reaped, where the fish is snared into a net and then hauled into a ship, where a church is built coral by coral until it is deemed a fitting place to worship. Ta-da! Magic happens by a trick of light and a gesture repeated, says the man who stands at the cusp of where a jet of water falls into a pool and creates out of his hands a spectacle out of an altogether natural thing. A woman holds a cup made of coconut husk into the air. A daughter smiles, her foot in the water on a stone because she has been told all her life that she is beautiful and she believes it. This one first came out online at the Asian American Writers Workshop. It's the title of the book. The Experiment of the Tropics. As a nest among the trees, as a garden among the bigger garden of the sea, mountain, view, as a wish that were drawn to scale, so the idea became foldable, a mere scaffold discarded for that long-lasting thing, that revivalist thing style, which, as the master carpenter implied, went beyond road, port, nut, bolt, wharf, a nail in a railroad, a pipe that opened and closed, the central portico, the color and the texture of a solid colonnade of Indi's silence, which was her sense of water flowing across the experiment that was the tropics. A riverbank made private, a theater of night guards, a soda parlor of that foreign good whiskey tractor red tin can with the picture of a scarab and a Quaker oat acquisition, that American thing, the good old good cheese and grape. There was a tennis court in the club where you hit the ball and nothing returned. We munched on its brandy biscuit. We ordered 2 of it. What is more tempting than a hat tipped precariously on a knee? Not me. What is more touching than a hand laid gently at the edge of the sea? An arm placed over the shoulder of a stranger is surely just a sign of camaraderie. Certainly. For every man that stumbles into a room feeling for the door, asking himself, what did I wish to do here now that I've come? There is a man who stays inside. He had a good eye once, that one who squinted against the light that slipped through a crack the way a buckle would slip through a hole to keep the neck from turning, the tongue from falling. Spittle left on grit teeth when it swayed among the leaves, birds' wings flattened the banana trees as in the war of every man that chose not to speak to himself, but chose instead to draw his signature across a face the way a body disemboweled itself. No body disembowels itself. It takes 2 men. There are 14 ways to say I might. 50 ways to turn the tide. 2 kitchens, 1 dry. There is a picture of a room within a brightly lit afternoon where my aunt sat staring at the bougainvillea until the day it died. She fell to the ground 3 times but then stood up, while the man in the kitchen sat after the meal had been set, eyeing the silver she had gathered, the lacquer. 13, 14, she began each morning with hot water. She lived on a diet of fish. There was a chair, but she didn't sit on that. She was my aunt. I have no idea what that last poem was about, but it made it to the book. Just a few more, just 2 more. Standstill stasis. The way the river carried a boat. The way a boy and his shimmer stood at the edge of the stream, unthinking. Before the invention of the telephone. Before the construction of the tram. that would take the flowers down from that mossy mountaintop to that sweltering town. It takes a man willing to walk up and down a village to determine how long it would take the aster to wilt in the neighbor's garden. Inside a vase, there is a fruit plucked without asking, like a letter stuffed with one's thoughts fresh from the underbelly of not saying, unbruised, unpromised, after the war was lost, after the refrigerator upon invention was defrosted. Farewell, goodbye, but not really. Or a nod done out of instinct. Or a sir in the room still sleeping with his legs open this far into the morning when every other dear gentleman would be walking in the light. There was a ship and it was sailing. There was a group of men standing in line looking in the same direction, suggesting that a war was happening, but only somewhere far, beyond the sheen of a photograph of a sea seen on the edge of a hat, or the prow of a boat, which was really the sheen of me trying hard to be a boy, arm against my hip so only a splinter could tremble my lip. I would like to thank the designer of my dress for the ribbon around my chest, so in the event of any future misdemeanor, I will have the luxury of an apology with a flower on my heart. Farewell, goodbye, but not really. Imagine that you are out on a stroll merely, as in a game of kings and queens where you closed the flower, walk, and you opened the flower, walk. And then you turned around. Thank you very much.
Yeah, let's have one final round of applause for all four readers. And and I would love to invite all four readers up to the stage for the talk show time. Okay.
A nice futon.
Yeah, this is a very famous green futon. Yeah, so thank you all for these readings. The event theme of the night, memory vessels. I think when we were first kind of just conceptualizing the theme and bringing everyone together. It wasn't immediately clear to me exactly what that word phrase meant, and even how it really was applicable to each book of poetry. But I think somehow meaning just finds a way of creating itself sometimes. But I wanted to maybe just start our conversation about just asking you to kind of like reflect on the like vesselness of your work, and thinking about the kind of like what this word means, and to the extent to which you identify like a vessel or a kind of like memory vessel in the maybe the material of your critical subject objects of poetry. So actually, I mean, I take the word came from the back of the Autobiography of Horse. The word vessel appears there, and so kind of thinking about like, yeah, this, the object that you can enter to go back. So maybe, and yeah, Jenifer, the horse is actually like a physical object that you can get inside. Or maybe it can be like the river Musi. Am I saying that correct? Or Musi, yeah. Or Shami, you also have, there's a line of one poem, may a song be an anchor while your body falls into itself. So I was also kind of thinking like the anchor as another kind of vessel. Or Hai Dang, I know you have, there's a lot of like material objects that you work with, like the Norton Anthology of Literature, or the work of other Vietnamese poets, or kind of the Vietnam Center and Archive. And Lawrence, the photographs that we just saw. So yeah, actually, just to think about like the word vessel and how do you identify with the vessels? In no particular order, but yeah, sure.
Well, so I found myself writing about really difficult things that I couldn't articulate. So because I was researching the horse and became obsessed with the horse, I found it a thing that could withstand that pressure of being unable to write or think or look at something. So in many ways, like the horse became a friend and a shield, and like this physical thing that I rode, it felt very physical to me, this thing that I rode to like inside the caves of my heart and my mind, and it made me feel like I wasn't alone because I had it always there.
Yeah, for me, I think of vessel as a ship. You know, if you're asking about like what the word vessel and memory comes to, makes me think of, it's the idea of a ship, and being in a vessel of sorts. This book was initially titled There, THERE, because most of the poems were written away from Cebu, and I felt as I was looking at these photographs, it was the question for me of what it meant to write about a place when you were far from it, where it wasn't here, it was there. So it was so important to me to think of these attempts at writing about poems as being, when we're away from home, kind of ships that we find ourselves in, the kind of motion that these ships are in, the kind of music I think that comes with remembering also. Those were the things that were very important to me as I was thinking and looking at these photographs. So it's not just for me like the vessel as the photograph or even the poem, but the kind of vessels that we find ourselves in when we're writing. Yeah.
I guess I would add that I think the metaphor is useful in thinking about writing, as we also use the word craft, right?
Mm-hmm.
The craft of poetry. So I think if poems were ships, or if my poems or our poems were ships, they might be, or the way that I look at them, they're very leaky.
Yeah.
They're leaky and frail, especially when we're thinking about memory. I mean, it's something we want to carry across, or we've received something, or something's been carried across to us, right? But even that seems so sort of frail and leaky, and our own reception of it is invested with our own like personal interest, right? I guess that's all I would add. That it is a ship, but it's a kind of a leaky and frail one.
Yeah.
Thank you. To me, I looked at it as the thing we carry in order to survive our memories sometimes. Oftentimes, especially as we can be in a place and it isn't always over there, or it could be an imagined place, or it could be a place that is, you can see it being erased. And so memory vessels become the tools to pass on stories that they help carry us. And they sometimes are, and why I was trying to share each poem as memory vessel as body or memory vessel as soul, because even just our time in this life, we are just in this container of a body. and the things that we start collecting, and what are we holding in our body, and then again coming back to water as this most ancient memory keeper and witness. I just find that really humbling, that the water that helps us to survive and live is the same water that has only been here on Earth throughout, the trillion years of. And finally, when we lose our anchors, as people that may be displaced, the memory of our loved ones or become sort of an anchor. Their memory becomes almost like your full, they carry your full memories of the idea of home, of the idea of the place over there, if you didn't have the privilege of getting to live over there. Or if you've had to move so many times, that person, that loved one, becomes that one safe place. So to me, memory vessel feels like a safe place and not a leaky place necessarily. Thanks.
I was just thinking about like the image of a leaky vessel, and what is leaking out is actually, I mean, in my image of it is water. And so there's something kind of beautiful about that. Like even in the leakiness of it, there's that whatever's maintained in water itself is this like timeless, infinite material too. But maybe just to think about like I have this question about like the fugitive memory or the leaky vessel or this kind of the imagined memory or the apocryphal memory, something that's misremembered. Maybe you can share something with also what's like unsaid or unwritten, that like untold story. So I was kind of thinking about like how poetry is pressing against authenticity in this kind of like colonial construct of the authentic is a product of colonial, as a kind of a colonial concept. But that poetry is kind of pressing into a different kind of authenticity of feeling or experience. So my question was kind of thinking about how important or necessary is that like disruption or the mistake in memory, in the leakiness of the memory or the sort of wrongness of the memory.
May I respond to No, writing the poems in the book felt very wet to me. Like it was a very wet experience.
The wet grass.
Yeah. It made me think of like photographs being developed in old style, but also like in terms of form. I think a lot of the poems in the book were prose poems, so it made me re-encounter what it meant to like write in paragraphs or sentences, which always to me felt more liquid than the verse. So it seemed like I was dealing with something not too solid. So I do feel like it's a lot. I really feel like it's leaky and wet and mossy and. But that it was important to me too that I was at very early on. I knew I did not want to do too much research when I was dealing with the photographs, and that was something I was like, I wanted. Yeah, I was thinking about that a lot. Like, did I want to be authentic? Did I want to be historically accurate when I was looking at these photographs? And the more I dwelt with them, the more I felt that the project of accuracy was a historian's job. And it was almost like, what would a poet do with history? And what I did at least was just like kind of play around with it. So I was interested in the little details that got caught in the photograph that might not have meant to be caught there. I was not too interested in the main message. I was interested in the accidental flower, the piece of cloth that found itself in the photograph. And I felt like it was in those parts of historical accuracy where desire could, or humor could occupy. And I was interested in those potentially problematic feelings regarding a very difficult history where we're taught to be serious about it. And I was kind of fascinated with what it meant to tickle colonialism or laugh with it. I feel I offended probably some historians in the process, but I felt like that was what I wanted to do.
Well, I sort of had maybe the opposite experience or a different type of research experience. So I researched heavily about the horse because I was obsessed with it and was interested in our relationship to the horse, its history, what it did for civilization, its mythology, all of that. And I found out during the research process that I was researching something else's history because I was compensating for my own lack of history or what I felt a lack of. So the horse's history sort of replaced mine, and in that overlap, a really strange thing happened where I felt more okay, like looking into myself more honestly or I guess more earnestly in some way.
That's really interesting because I do a lot of my poems are research based too, and at first there was a kind of resistance to like the historians maybe idea of like a fact or event, right? I absolutely think there's like like the work we do is imaginative and emotional, but there's also something. I think I've gotten to the point where I do a lot of research, but the facts and the leakiness, the more you research, the more like uncertainty there seems to be, and that what the facts are sort of like constraints. Like if I learn something, it might take the poem in a different direction, and I find that kind of exciting. And I'm also interested in, especially in the age of fake news, literature's relationship to like facts and clarity, I think can be a I don't know, something that literature can, in a way, counterintuitively provide, right? But I mean, I take Lawrence. You absolutely there has to be a kind of imaginative, emotional work there too.
For me, it was a sort of sensory research, especially since there's a multiplicity of histories happening at any given moment. Everyone here has their own experience of what even this reading was for them tonight, and from their own perspective, it's the people in power that end up putting a hold on what the quote facts are, the history. And so when you see your own people's history being erased by another narrative, then sometimes all you have is the sensory histories, the body memory. Even if you lived in a place just for a short while as a kid, you're always going to remember the way the sun shone a certain way, or the smell of diesel in the air, and all these other things that you can piece together later of what that meant. But it's yours. And to me, what I tried to do was really think about those sensory research, that sometimes there'll be people from Hyderabad, for example, to say, how did you know that? And I don't have an answer sometimes, but I think it comes from that taste, the smell, the way the dust is on your face, these things that might seem very small that lend to connect to sort of larger histories.
Yeah, thank you. I guess thinking about maybe like sensory and the body, there was we had a reading here in this space a few weeks ago with the poet Aldrin Valdez, and he said something that I want to just like share with you. He said during his reading, to retrace your own alienation back to a historical source is an act of self-compassion. And so I kind of wanted just to share that and get your comments on that, or thinking about like maybe like a sort of resistance to the word healing, because that's not necessarily the function of poetry, but maybe it's on this sort of spectrum of keeping open certain wounds, or just declaring the pain rather than healing from the pain. But yeah, so kind of thinking about in this work of retracing or research or like a sensory feeling, that if you relate to this idea of self-compassion, and maybe along with that, like where on the hurt healing spectrum does poetry stand?
For me, I'm interested in, I mean, I don't necessarily look at it as a hurt. All of these things that happen to us are just lessons in us evolving. So I'm not afraid of hurt or grief, but to see grief, for example, as something that transforms, that, you know, you don't have to be done with, or, you know, I'm going to share it in a poem and just put it out there, but more, so what is the process of grief? What are the ways, I'm just using grief as an example, you know, what are the ways that this feeling changes? What ways does it transform? What ways does it just become a part of you? So, you know, there's the sort of grief of missing a home. There's the grief of losing your anchor. There's the grief of losing, you know, loved ones that you just have to question everything at that point. And you change. You even lose a part of yourself maybe in that moment. And so I'm really fascinated the way poetry can transmute emotions, and the ways that certain emotions are very linked with each other. So that with grief, I always see a link with joy, and with death, birth, and they're just so connected to each other. So I love the way poetry, in the ways that there's so few words sometimes in a poem that can hold a lifetime. The ways in which just 5 minutes can transform your whole life, and you've become a completely different person in that 5 minutes. I'm really fascinated with that and moved by that, and have, you know, that's where I was coming from, at least with my relationship to poetry.
Well, I don't want to say that love is painful or like use that expression, but you know when you think something is so cute or you love it so much, you just want to squeeze it to death, right? I feel like poetry, at least writing this book, it was that act. So I was sort of like squeezing the horse, trying to see what kind of weird juices I could get out of it, but also like squeezing myself and dissecting myself. And one end, it's sort of like self-mutilation, but on the other end, it's getting closer to all the little parts, the tinier parts that I've sort of neglected. So it's very, I don't know, it's just a push and pull, like a tension between the two.
I just wanted to read one of your lines back to you, that you talk about the self-mutilation of the horse. In these, it's a word called stereotypies. Stereotypies.
I think it's either or. Yeah.
But it's this self-injurious, self-rewarding behavior of a horse, like biting itself or shaking its head repeatedly. And you write, self-mutilation syndrome is a condition involving a repetitive and seemingly dysfunctional sequence of movements. And that repetitive and seemingly dysfunctional sequence of movements made me think about poetry.
Yeah. And they say like madness or obsession or even like returning to the same story or the same photograph, it's the same thing repeated over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'm finding it hard to answer because I think it's very important to me. I do feel poetry heals, but it heals in a very different way than we think healing is done. Um, I did feel as I was writing these poems on photographs that I was in many ways healing, trying to heal something, but I wasn't really quite sure, even until now, what kind of wound it was trying to heal. A part of me was wondering whether it was, healing, what it means when we sever our ties from the places that shape us, because that severing does happen, and I think it's hard to acknowledge that and find words for that. And I've always felt that poetry was one way to articulate the kind of pain that comes with a necessary way of moving away from something. So I definitely felt that part of the project was in many ways saying goodbye to something, and how difficult and necessary that sometimes is. How it was doing it, though, I still don't have any idea. Repetition was so important. A lot of the poems repeat themselves. When I was looking at the photographs, I was looking at them in ways that we look at photographs, which is not. We don't look at photographs from top to bottom. We look at, it's like a kind of hypnosis, almost, where we swing our gaze across a scene, and maybe finding a kind of music of looking in that rhythm of gazing was part of, hopefully, a healing that might have happened. We'll see. But yeah, I think it's tied to to looking, for me at least, in this project, and what kind of looking would hopefully maybe heal.
I've just been sitting here trying to think about where I am on the spectrum of, what is it, pain and pleasure and identity. I think I'm on
hurt
the
healing.
hurt healing. I think I'm on the pain and alienation end of the spectrum. But I think I thank you for that quote, because there is a kind of there's a kind of self-cure in the historicizing or writing about or writing through, to maybe not heal, but maybe, to use a different word, to be after a kind of knowledge, and that knowledge may be like bad knowledge. It might be like not so comforting knowledge, right? But there's a kind of clarity that, at least for me, the poems I'm writing to, I'm sort of seeking a kind of clarity, but that clarity might not make me feel better, right? It might make me feel worse.
Yeah, so I think I'll ask one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So if you have some questions, you can start thinking about them. Yeah, so just to kind of like go from what you said of this, like a knowledge search, or searching for a knowledge, or a kind of like maybe understanding. I was kind of thinking that can be something that's shared across all the work, is this like hunger for meaning, and thinking specifically about place. So maybe the final question, just to talk a little bit more about place in its specificity or non-specificity. So like in Hai Dang, I know there's this very specific naming of place that happens. Like there's so many cities mentioned, and even one poem is titled a postal address, right? Like a PO box or something like that. So it's like very specific. But then there's also that, like the erosion of place somehow starts to happen with all that specificity. Like there's this beautiful poem where you're having a map that like this cheap map the ink starts to rub off on your skin, and it becomes this like unpronounceable place. And then also with Lawrence, like the sort of specificity that it's not until the ending credits of the book that we know what city those photos are taken in. So there's this kind of placelessness, unnamed place throughout the book. And in Sham-e, I love the line that you say, "A chasm forever rewriting itself in my heart," about your home city. So there's a kind of like place that's almost an absence of place too. And with Jenifer, I was thinking about, like, okay, where's the place of Autobiography of Horse? And I was really thinking it's the mind, like the place of this mind that is maybe like a contested place or like a shared place with another creature, or maybe even like an occupied or pathologized place. Thinking about place and meaning, like meaning of a place, and poetry as a way of like kind of understanding a place that you cannot be in or you're not in. Is it possible to understand a place?
Since you started off with me, I guess I sort of think that you can't avoid like the place you're writing from or who you are, or the particular time and place that the poem is coming from, whether it's explicitly acknowledged in a name or autobiographical, but it's always marked by like where you are, who you are. And one of the more useful suggestions that I received in putting together the manuscript, because it goes back and forth in time and it sort of goes all over, was to try to speak directly from your place in space and time. So there's a kind of anchoring point. That was very useful to me just because it was kind of like an anchoring point for me. But I can't think, I don't think you can sort of avoid that.
So when there's so few places that feel safe, I'm really interested in the safe place, even if it's in the imagination or in the heart. And so in my poems, I try to create that, whether that's in the soft memory or even just the question. And I'm also interested in multiple places happening at once and the multiplicity of time and conversation in this world and also other worlds, the unseen worlds. And so place can be the physical place, but there's also the unseen that is also a part of us, and who walks with us in those spaces. And sometimes, for example, like after my father passed away, I felt like I learned so much more about him than when he was with me. But that does not mean those are all not real experiences of place together and our ongoing relationship that didn't end the day he passed away from his body. And so similarly, with my relationship with Hyderabad, and even my relationship in my time in England, there isn't one place. I think there's a quote in one of my poems about there isn't one place. I can't remember which one, but that there isn't one like tangible place for me, but the conversation of different spaces, places, and seen, unseen, physical, and also non-physical, which is why I really, really enjoy your work, because you take these very specific, like physical detail, and it's in the expansiveness of like our consciousness. And I find horses to be so like archetypical and such spiritual creatures. I just really love your work.
That's an extremely generous comment. You made it sound a lot better than I could have ever articulated. As I was listening to your responses, just one thought came up. So, writing this made me feel like wild. And what I found that I needed especially when I was organizing this manuscript, was order. And to me, the place that mattered most was that kind of stillness of not feeling like I'm going all over the place, that I have like an anchor, like we've been using that word, like that is a place, even though it's momentarily there.
For me, just to add to that, I feel like the idea of destination, I think, was something that I was thinking about. That these poems do not have a destination, and place too. I feel like I'm just fidgeting around on a couch the whole time. When these poems are like fidgeting. I feel like they're ways of making ourselves feel at home in language and in the places where we find ourselves in. So it's that motion. It's not someone with an intention or a destination in mind. And I feel like many of the poems don't really end somewhere. But it's in the fidgeting where I found the most pleasure in writing. And maybe that can be like a kind of place too. Not so much like the name or like where you end up in, but like just how you dance around a space. Yeah.
Thank you. With that, the idea of not ending with an ending, but I'm afraid we are running out of time. And if you do have a question, maybe what you could do is come and ask it in person, because we'll have to wrap up for the night on stage here. So thank you so much to all the poets, and thank you to the audience, and thank you to Singapore Unbound for the co-sponsoring this event. Hope to talk with you all more.